Hey, everybody, welcome. Here is the webinar that I think many of you have been waiting for. It's a two-parter. It's kind of long, and make sure that you have your workbook close by. You've got it opened on your favorite device, or if you've printed it off, you've got it there to have the pen to paper experience. Because there are many times throughout our time together that I'll ask you to pause, go and write, and then come back. So it is a two-parter about proprioception and the vestibular needs of children in your classroom, in early childhood and school-age classrooms. We're going to be talking a lot about ideas. We'll talk a lot about what might be going on in the mind and in the body of the children in your classroom. So let's get started. So I want to say hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Amy Williams with Amy Williams Academy. And I got to tell you, this class is something that is one of my greatest hits. Lots and lots of schools around the world have asked for this information and for this experience to think more critically and more deeply and with greater respect about the children in their classroom who are showing some behaviors that they might need a little more proprioceptive input or vestibular input, or maybe they're showing sensitivities. So we're going to talk about that over the next little while together. But I'm Amy Williams. I'm a dance movement therapist and expressive arts therapist by training, and certainly that experience and education and background comes into play in the material that we're going to talk about today. So my goal in the work that I do is to help educators and families realize that they can be confident and calm and comfortable as they show up as the best important adult in the lives of the children that they love. So there's a picture of me. Clearly, I was very interested in sensory input. So I loved to hear the music loud. Interestingly enough, as a kid, I liked it loud, but as an adult, I'm a little more sensitive to sound. So I've got myself some good earplugs that dampen the sound if things are really loud. Or maybe that's just me getting older. But yeah, we all have a sensory palette, right? So we have places and experiences that we want more of, and some experiences that we want less of. Might really enjoy a lot of visual input, or we might be easily overloaded by that kind of, if there is excessive input in that area, right? So we've got several senses that we know about, right? Like visual, auditory, taste, tactile, right? We know like the basics, but how much do we know about proprioception? How much do we know about the vestibular sense? So let's dive in and talk more about it, because certainly we have our own sensitivities and our own places where we want more input, and so do our children. Sometimes it's helpful to really reflect on our own sensory palette, right? So as we talk about P&V, which is short for proprioception and the vestibular sense, as we're talking about it today, give yourself some time to pause and just consider for your own self, where do you find greater satisfaction, with more or less, right? Okay, so let's get on. I want you to first meet Millie. This is my daughter, Millie. She's a grown woman now. And as a young child, she was absolutely somebody who was sensory seeking in proprioceptive and vestibular areas, right? So you could see here, here she was experiencing extreme joy and she was covered in mud, right? So there are places and times where she sought more of that input. So giving really strong hugs, or spinning around and around a pole as fast as she could, or spinning around and around in the backyard. Pushing and lifting heavy things seemed to bring her so much satisfaction and would help her regulate when her emotions got really big. Lifting up something heavy, pushing something heavy, getting a really big hug or giving a really big hug was one way that she was able to calm, to manage a big emotion when it came up. And she does that today. So with her in mind, and with other children that you might be thinking about as we're talking about this material, we're gonna divide this into two parts. I encourage you, when you get to the end of part one, that you pause this, turn it off, go spend a couple days in your classroom or with the children that you really love and that you are their important adult, and check it out. See what it is that you see. Do some observation and some thinking and evaluating of, how can I do things differently to better support this child? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and dive into part one right now. So my first question and my first prompt for you, you've got your workbook, right? Either on your device or right there in front of you. My big first question is, what do you want? What are you hoping to get from the time that you have put together and set aside with as few interruptions as possible to take this webinar? So what do you want? What is your intention from today? So you've got the title and you've got a description. And you kind of have an idea of what we're going to talk about. So what are you hoping to get from today? So pause right here and then go to your workbook and just write that down. So pause, and when you're ready, come on back. I'll be right here. Okay, now that we're back, here we go, part one. So we know, here's what we know about sensory input, all the senses, right? So we know that we receive information through our ear, through the mechanisms in our ear. We receive information through our eyes, through our mouth, through our skin, right? We also receive it through different specialized cells in our body around pressure and about balance, right? So we receive that information through our bodies, then we interpret it. In our brain, we think, okay, what is this? Is this something that I like, that I don't like, that feels good? I want more of that. I want less of that. We interpret, what is this that's coming in? This is the sound of a squirrel. This is the sound of an alarm. This is the sound of a truck going down the road, right? So we interpret, what is that thing, right? What is it that we're experiencing? I've put my hand in something. Is that something that's slippery or wet or dry or crunchy, right? So we receive and then we interpret. And after that, we modulate. So we make that decision of, okay. So do I want more of that or do I want less of that? Am I going to take my hand out of that wet thing or that crunchy thing? Or is it okay? I feel that tag in the back of my shirt on my neck. Is that, does that bother me or not? Okay. Then we integrate. We make that decision of, okay, that tag is really bugging me. I'm going to change shirts, or I notice it. It's okay. Right. So through this process, receiving, interpreting, modulating, and integrating, know that that happens for most typically developing humans like that. Right? So we receive, interpret, modulate, and integrate right away. Now, sometimes, some of us, it might take a little bit longer, or we might be more affected by that, or feel that we're moving into sensory overload, sensi-ovi for short, right? So we get to that sensi-ovi place. What are we going to do next? Do we get out of that situation or do we lean into it, right? So we have that experience, and so do the children in our classroom. Okay, so we're going to take a pause right here because I'm curious about what is it that you know about proprioception? What is it that you know about the vestibular sense already? So we're going to pause for a second and just write down what's on your mind. What do you think about? How would you describe P and V to someone in an elevator who asks you about that? How strange that would be. However, what is it that you know about it already? So now's the time to pause and write. So push pause, and when you're finished, come on back. Okay, now you're back. Let's take a deep breath. All right, so what the heck are these anyway? You've probably heard proprioception. You've probably heard vestibular before. Maybe you knew about it, maybe not. But let's get to like a basic definition, if you will. So the proprioceptive sense, proprioception, aids in us understanding and moving our body with agility and with a coordination. How is my body moving through space? right? The next one is vestibular, balance, spatial orientation. Where is my body? Am I moving? Am I standing still? Am I leaning? And do I catch myself? Am I on balance? I'm going to stand on one foot. That's your vestibular sense telling you what's going on with your body, right? So let's do a little vocabulary building that will lean into the rest of our time together on this webinar. Okay, so the first word that I'd like for you to know is the word praxis, right? Our goal as humans, one goal is to be praxic, right? It means action or doing. Our goal is to be praxic, right? Motor planning, that's another one. And that's the practice of a movement until mastery. So remember the time when maybe you first put on roller skates, right? And you stood up, or ice skates, or were on a skateboard. And the first time you did it, you probably fell down, or you probably lost your balance. And you didn't quite get it until you did it over and over again. Now, roller skating and ice skating and skateboarding are kind of big ones where you need to do a lot of motor planning usually. But think about all the other things that you've practiced and you've achieved mastery. Simple things like zipping up your coat or tying your shoe or moving a glass from a cabinet to the counter, right? The practice of that, you can probably do that pretty quickly now, right? Because you've practiced it. You've had some motor planning in doing that. We could probably put on our socks and shoes pretty quickly, right? Consider when we're working with young children, they are beginning to experience praxis and they're beginning to experience that motor planning that it takes to be able to put on their rain boots or to put on their shoes or to zip up their own coat or to tie their own shoes, right? So that's where execution comes in. That's the practice and practice again and again to achieve that mastery, right? Most of us have probably worked with a young child and they were putting on their coat or putting on their shoes or buckling their own seatbelt. And we rush in to assist and they tell us, I can do it. I'm going to do it myself. You worry about your own self. I'm going to worry about myself, right? And sometimes that practice of motor planning can take longer than maybe we want it to. We want to get in the car and go, or we've got to move from inside to outside or from outside to inside, right? And so in our rush as the adult, we might rob them of the experience of that motor planning and execution so that they can achieve that mastery, so they can do it for themselves, right? Many of us have, maybe you've baked in the kitchen or cooked in the kitchen with a young child, and we know that sometimes it can be frustrating because they're still learning how to pour or to spoon or to stir or to mix, right? So when we could take a beat and a moment to know that, okay, this is an investment in time. If I allow this practice to happen where it's a little awkward and maybe messy, that's when that's the experience that they need to have to achieve mastery, right? Now, we've been talking mostly about the physical pieces, the things that like putting on boots or zipping up a coat or stirring batter. But there are other things that our children want to practice as well. So the execution of asking a friend to play or for waiting your turn, right? There are all sorts of places and ways and experiences that children must practice so that they can achieve mastery, so that they can gracefully and clearly ask their friend to play and listen to and know what to do if that person says yes or if that person says not right now, right? But today we are going to focus a little more on the physical side, but just know that execution piece shows up in lots of different areas. Yeah. Okay, some more vocabulary words. So agility. So agility is the capacity to control the direction of your body or a body part during rapid movements, right? When we see children who are first learning to walk and they're, it's almost like they're walking like like a block, right? And then soon they begin to cross the midline a little more, and then they begin to walk like this, and then they begin to run, right? And then they begin to want to play soccer or kick a ball or to throw a ball, right? As the as the practice happens, the agility often follows, right? So the capacity to control that body movement with grace and with a clear and efficient movement, motor movement, that comes from all of that practice, right? So agility comes from practice, right? Okay, so the next vocabulary word is balance, right? So balance is your ability to maintain equilibrium by keeping the line of gravity of your body within your body's base of support, right? So my balance is really helpful to keep me upright, or to stand on one foot, or to walk from one foot to another, right? I'm thinking of a dancer and choreographer, Doris Humphrey, from decades ago, who said that every movement falls somewhere along an arc of fall and recovery, fall and recovery. So when you take a step, you're actually, there's a moment of falling, and then your other foot swings forward to transfer the weight, and then you take a step. Recovery. Fall again, and you recover, fall and recover. Same thing with if you drop your hand or you reach out to shake someone's hand, there's a fall and recovery to all movement. So, there's something to watch over the next week or two, is how many times a day, millions probably of times, where you fall and recover in small and in big ways. And that fall and recovery is assisted by our sense of balance, right? Okay, the next one, coordination. That's the smoothness of an activity. Can I take this glass from the cabinet and place it on the counter without crashing it down? Can I lift this bucket and put it over here with some sort of coordination, right? Can I can I crack the egg, right, without getting the shells everywhere? Can I move something from one place to another? Can I do a time step? Can I ride my bicycle or do a hula hoop trick? Or, think of all the different ways and places and spaces and opportunities that children and all of us have to practice coordination, right? That smoothness of an activity. So you see the picture of this child here with the Swiffer, and imagine what so much is going on. This child is practicing motor planning of sweeping the floor. The agility is something that's necessary so that it doesn't crash into the wall or his friend that's behind him. The balance that's necessary. You see how his body is crouched down to achieve balance and not fall over and walk forward and back as the task requires. And the coordination is so that he can smoothly wipe the floor from front to back, front to back, front to back, right? Interesting that so much is happening when children are sweeping a floor or dusting a shelf or washing a window or making a salad. So much. Okay. So here's a time when I want you to pause, go do something, and come back. Okay. So in your workbook, there is a link to a video on YouTube that goes more in depth about proprioception itself. So I'd like for you to pause right now, go to that, watch it, take some notes as you wish. And after you watch that, come on back. Okay. So now you're back. Now it's time to do it. We're going to do some things. We're going to actually practice some things. So what I invite you to do is to put everything down, right? And get to a place where you're feeling comfortable. Feel free if you want to stand up. That's great too. But we're going to practice some proprioception, right? So what I'd like for you to do is to take two hands in front of you, right? And as smoothly as you can, bring your two hands together and join at your fingertips. Okay, cool. Now next, I want you to take one finger and bring them together. Okay, let's try that again. And maybe close your eyes and see if you could do that. Maybe you were successful. Maybe it was a little wonky, right? Okay, now we're going to try something even more difficult. Those are pretty simple because they're the same on both sides, pretty symmetrical. So my invitation for you is to take one finger like this and make a circle going up and out and over, right? So you're just going to make a circle in the sagittal plane. That's the forward and back plane, up and over. Got it? Okay, cool. Now we're going to take your other finger and go opposite. So I'm going to go in and down, out and up, right? So it's going in the opposite direction. You know what I'm going to do? We're going to have both hands going at the same time. So one goes forward as the other one goes back, right? So keep that going. If you need to pause and come back, that's cool. Bonus if you can reverse that. Okay, so try that. Bring your friends in, invite them too. Okay, here's another one. So I'd like for you to take, and we'll work with our hands now. Feel free, if you want to give yourself an extra challenge, try it with a different body part, like your feet or your knees, right? Good luck with that one. I think the knees would be difficult. Anyway, here we go. So this one goes like this. So with this hand, we're going to make a triangle. And I'm actually going to snap. Okay, triangle. Got it? Oh, cool. Next one, on this side, we're going to do a square. So 1, 2. Okay, cool. Got it? You know what I'm going to do? We're going to do them both at the same time. Got to let you know, this takes a minute. This takes some practice. This takes some, we're going to practice. We're going to do the execution until we achieve mastery. Okay, so here we go. We're going to triangle on this side and we're going to square on this side. Ready? And so hard. Okay, how many times have I done this? Like a lot of times, and it still takes a beat or two to get into that rhythm. So if you feel like you want to pause until you can achieve mastery, go for it. If you could get your feet, one to do a triangle and the other foot to do a square, wow, impressive. Okay, so that was our proprioceptive. We were activating our proprioceptive sense, right? Okay, so now I'm curious, what do you see in your classroom when children are actively trying to figure out how they're moving their body through space? How much effort does it take to contract and pick up something like a bucket? How much do they have when they release to put that bucket down on the ground or to lift a basket of laundry and put that basket of laundry down, right? So proprioceptive activates our muscles. How much do I contract and how much do I release, right? With the triangle and the square, we were activating that. When do I change direction, right? When do I tell my muscles to change from making a triangle to changing the direction to make a square, right? Okay, so let's see. So what do you see in your classroom? When those muscles contract and when do they release, right? We've got muscles on either side of our arm, right? So when we lift, we're activating, let's look at our biceps and our triceps, okay? Didn't know this was going to be an anatomy lesson, right? So when I lift something heavy, I know how much to contract this muscle and how much to release this muscle so that I can actually bend at this joint and all of these joints. So there's a lot of information going from our brain to the muscles and the joints and all of it in our arms to know, okay, contract this muscle. Oh yeah, release this muscle so you can lift that bucket or lift that basket of laundry, right? Now When I put it down, I'm going to do the opposite of that. So I'm going to release this muscle and contract this muscle to put that bucket down or to put that basket down, right? That's one example, right? Another example where you might see proprioception and proprioceptive input seeking behavior is when a child comes to hug you, right? So they might hug you and it feels like, oh, ouch, that's really tight, right? And they're still learning how much to contract and how much to release, right? So all of that is still under construction in their body, the body and the mind connection. So it could take a bit for a child to know how much is just right when I hug someone, how much is just right when I shake someone's hand, how much is just right when I lift that basket of laundry. Do I lift it and everything falls everywhere, or do I drop it and things spill over? I'm still learning, right? Same thing with the child in this picture. How much do I push? And how much do I push forward? How much do I push down to keep that Swiffer head on the ground smoothly, right? All of that comes together, and we understand that in our body and in our mind through our proprioceptive sense, right? Okay, so let's take another pause and write down, what is it that you see? How do you see children experiencing the environment through their proprioceptive skill, proprioceptive sense, right? Okay, so I've given you a couple of ideas: the lifting of laundry, the picking up of a bucket, right? The pushing of a Swiffer. What else do you see? Maybe you can go outside of your classroom and consider your outdoor area. Where and how often do they have an opportunity to practice those kinds of skills? How often and how many opportunities do they have to refine and practice that that proprioception in the way that they interact with their world? Okay, so pause, write your thoughts, and come on back when you're ready. Okay, we're back. Deep breath. Okay, now we're going to talk about vestibular. What is that, right? You've probably seen, or maybe you have in your school program, one of these, I call them scoots. I'm sure there's another word for them, but you know what I mean. These bicycle vehicles where there are no pedals, but a child really practices that sense of balance in such a key way. So these bikes I recommend to everyone, right? If you have a program, just my own thought, my own opinions. Don't do training wheels. Go ahead and try this because they will find where to balance their body so that they don't fall side or to this side or to the other. Okay, so just a little idea and a tip from me. I recommend these 100%. Okay, so now's the time that I'd like for you to go to your workbook, or if you're on your device, go to the link that is there for you to click on, where the person talking will talk about the vestibular sense and how that mechanism in your ear, in your inner ear, informs our body about our balance. Okay, so if you love neuroscience and you kind of geek out about brains, you're going to love this. So go ahead and check that out and write down your thoughts about that and come on back when you're ready. Okay, now we're back. So now we're going to do some vestibular experiences, right? So if you can, stand up where you are, and we're going to practice our balance, right? So I invite you to lean to one side as far as you can without losing your balance. And when you feel that you're about to lose your balance, what do? You catch yourself. Most of us who are typically developing and have full access to our body have probably had lots of practice in this, right? So try leaning to one side and then back. I think of, I can't remember what the song was. Smooth Criminal, maybe Michael Jackson, where he does that lean forward, right? Okay, so that's kind of the vibe we're going for. So try that side to side and then forward and then back, right? Now, some of us have more difficulty with that, right? So give yourself some grace. Be patient with yourself. Some of our balance and some of us have a greater sense of where, when, and how to catch ourselves, right? So be careful. Don't hurt yourself, right? But this is our vestibular sense in action. We're figuring out how to move through the world and move through that movements that fall between on the arc of fall and recovery, right? Think about this. Okay, so while you're standing and leaning, I'm going to keep talking. Okay, so imagine when you go up steps, right? This is where P and V come together, and some visual too, right? Where we're figuring out how high to pick up our foot. That's our proprioception, the contraction and release of muscles, right? And then how far to swing our foot forward to place it down and push up to the next step, and again and again and again, right? So imagine, and maybe you've gone up some steps or down some steps that were uneven, right? Or I think all of us have done this. You maybe are going down some steps, and maybe you're distracted or watching something else, and you think there's one more step and there's not. Have you ever had that, that feeling? Or you think there isn't another step and there's one more step, and then whoops, you fall, right? That's your vestibular sense in action. And maybe we misunderstand the cue from our visual, right? So we think maybe, okay, I've gone down these steps, or I anticipate that they're going to be 5 steps and there are only 4, right? So that's where our visual sense, our proprioception, and our vestibular all come together, right? Anyway, check it out. Next time you go up some steps, just notice, can you do that with your eyes closed? What would that be like? Okay, now let's talk about vestibular in the classroom. So this is the motion and the movement through the classroom and the agility to move and balance, right? Some classrooms have a marking on the floor they call the ellipse. That's kind of a traditional something in Montessori spaces, not only in Montessori spaces, but it gives children an opportunity to really practice their vestibular sense and refine their vestibular sense of balance, right? So they're walking along the line. Maybe they have they're holding something in their hand, and the goal is to not drop that, right? So to keep your balance while holding something here. Maybe you can even practice holding a bell, and you're walking the ellipse and you try really hard not to make a sound with the bell. So that is refining the skill of refining the sense of vestibular, your equilibrium and your balance, right? So that's one way where you might see it in the classroom. Now, what are other ways that you see in your classroom where children are practicing and refining the sense? Okay, so we'll go ahead and pause, write down what you notice and what you see in your classroom, and come on back when you're finished. Okay, deep breath. Okay, let's go. Now, some of us have children in our classroom, and some of us may have given birth to some sensory seekers. I mean, you might be a sensory seeker yourself, right? So there's a really wonderful bit by this woman that I follow on Instagram. I recommend her. And you'll see a video of the child really seeking that P and V, proprioceptive and vestibular input, by flipping upside down, by taking those risks with their bodies, right? With big movements, right? Tricky movements. So here's a place to pause, go, watch that, write down your thoughts, your ideas, or what do you think about it? What did you notice, right? So sometimes when we see children doing this, like you see, flipping upside down or hanging upside down or spinning around and around and around, it may look like, oh, that child's dysregulated, something, I need to help them regulate. They're really going off the chain. They're really, maybe they're driving everybody bananas. When really what they're doing is trying to actively seek ways to regulate, right? So sometimes children who are seeking more input in an effort to find a sense of calm. So they have this feeling inside that of discomfort or that something's not right. So they squeeze their friend, or they push something over, or they flip upside down, or they spin around and around and around and around a pole or something out on the playground, right? Or they might pull on your apron or your shirt or your pants sometimes, right? So we've probably all had experience with children who are seeking that in that pressure, that deep pressure, by the deep squeezes or the hugs that are like a little too hard, right? That could be one way that they're trying to scratch that itch, so to speak, to satisfy that impulse or that need to have those big muscle contractions. Right now, let us remember that young children, there's still so much is happening between the body and the brain. All those neural connections are being made at lightning speed, and those connections are made through experience, right? So they're learning and they're practicing. Okay, I have this feeling, and I know, and my big muscle groups are growing, so I want to activate them. I need to move them so that all of that kind of comes online, if you will. So the flipping upside down, the spinning around and around, the running really fast, the lifting things that are heavy, the pushing things, the hugging things, all of that is purposeful, right? Their body is designed to create those connections between the brain and all the muscle systems, all the joints, all the systems in the entire body, right? So when we find ourselves getting annoyed by that, let's just remember that oftentimes that's the work of the child in their bodies is to do those kinds of things, right? For lots of reasons, to create those neural connections and to increase their agility and their ability to have equilibrium and balance. Agility, all of that comes through practice. Okay, so pause, go watch that. It's super short, and come on back when you're ready. Okay, so now we're back. Now, you probably came to this class with a child or some children in mind, right? So for the sake of the next little bit together, I'd like for you to think of one particular child that comes to mind as we've been describing P&V, proprioception and vestibular sense. Is there a child that comes to mind right away when you're thinking of the climbing up on top of things, or the spinning, or going upside down, or pushing, or squeezing a little too hard, or just squeezing at all, right? So think of a child, right? And take a moment and just write down some information about that child. Like, what is it that you see concretely, like specifically, what do you see them doing with their bodies that let you think, oh, okay, this is a sensory seeking child or a sensory avoidant child. We're going to talk about that in a little bit too, right? So put down some basic information about that child, because we'll go back to that in just a little while. Okay, so pause right now and write down what it is that you know, what it is that you've noticed, what have you observed with this particular child. All right, and when you're ready, push play again, and I'll be right here. Okay, now we're back. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about a professional crush that I have. I have several of them, but one is with Carol Kranowitz. I recommend the book, The Out of Sync Child. If you don't have it yet, it's a classic. There's also another version called The Out of Sync Child Has Fun. That's another great one to have as well. Well, in that book and in the work that Carol Kranowitz has done in the world with young children and with educators, she's kind of coined the phrase the out of sync child, right? And the out of sync child is a child who is still figuring out how to do things and hasn't quite figured out how to sync up what they want to do, what they can do, and what they do, right? So in that book and in her work, she talks about a child who is out of sync may need 18 times to get it, right? To be able to pour from a pitcher into a cup, or to connect the bottom of the zipper and pull it up, or to put their shoes on and put the Velcro across, or tie the bow, right? It could take lots of times. And some children and some adults get things pretty quickly. Okay, cool. And then some things, it may take a little longer, right? So we all have friends, and think about this. We may have a friend who is an incredible salsa dancer, or who can knit really quickly and do like cable knits. What? Who? I can't do that. So, using that example, it would take me a lot longer and more attempts to be able to get that particular speed, and without dropping any stitches. It's going to take me a lot longer than, say, my friend Liz, who is really skilled and talented. She started learning at about the same time when she taught me the basic stitch. Now, she got really good really quickly. Me, not so much. But here's the thing, she practiced more than I did, right? And it turned out that it took her less practices, right? Less executions to achieve mastery than it was taking me. And then I decided that I just didn't want to do it anymore. So I'm being silly, but think about other people that you know that maybe they get something really quickly, right? Maybe they can do Sudoku much faster than you can. Okay, maybe they can get a particular dance move, or they can get moving something from here to there, or organizing their classroom much more quickly than you can, right? And then there will be things that you get and you can achieve mastery really quickly, right? And others around you are looking at you like, how in the world did you do that? And we think to ourselves, I just did it, right? Okay, so there will be different children and different people will achieve mastery at different times, right? So Carol Kranowitz is talking about a child who is sort of out of sync. They're still syncing up their sensory balance in their body and in their mind, right? It might take them longer to achieve mastery than a child who may be more typically developing, right? So think about children that you give a lesson on zipping up their coat, and they try it a couple times and they struggle a couple times, but they get it pretty quickly. And then you've got children in the same classroom who really struggle with it for whatever reason. And it can take them about 5 times. Other children, it might take 10. Some children, it might take 18, right? So that reminds us of the importance of being patient, understanding that children can do hard things when we give them that space to do that, and the belief that they can do that, right? Do they have the tools that they need to be able to do that job well? Have they received guidance? Have they received time to struggle with it and figure it out, right? Okay, so we've done some of these already, some of these experiences that will take us some time for mastery, right? So we've done the squares and the triangle, right? the snaps in a triangle and a line. Squares and circle is another similar one, but we'll play around with it just a little bit more right here, right now. So fingers overhead looks like this. So I'd like for you to take your fingers and you're going to bend them. And I'd like for you to not look, but try to put them together over your head without looking, right? So I'm going to do this. I'm really having a hard time, right? So try that over your head where you can't see. Bonus extra credit if you want to try it behind your back, right? Put your fingers together behind your back. Tricky, huh? The more practice you have, the more practice you give yourself time to struggle with it, you'll get it eventually. Now, most people. Now, some people are going to get it right away, and some people, it will take a little bit, right? So we've done fingers overhead. We've done the squares in the circle, right? So the squares, the circles that go in opposite direction. We've done the triangle and the square snapping, right? You could do just plain without the snaps, circle here and square here. Let's try that one together. Okay, so we're gonna go circle on this side. Got it? And now I'd like for you to do a square over here. I have to be quiet a minute because I have to focus. Notice if your square starts to become a circle or if your circle starts to become a square. Extra challenge is to switch. So if you've been doing a circle on one hand, try the circle with the other hand. It might be that it's easier. It's really hard for me. Okay. So give yourself some time and practice to see if you can achieve mastery in this, right? It may take a while. Feel free to pause, call your people in that are close by and say, oh my gosh, come try this. And notice who gets it pretty quickly and who but struggles. Okay. So do that if you wish. Pause and come on back. But I'm about to ask you to pause and write about a time when you saw a child achieve mastery. And maybe it's not that they're doing circles and squares, but they're putting on their rain boots, or they're putting on their coat, or taking off their coat, hanging their backpack on the peg, putting their work back on the shelf, rolling up the rug, right? So think about a time when you saw a child, you taught them how to do something, or they were trying something brand new and it took them a bit, but they eventually got it, right? So pause and we'll do some writing. And what you remember, what did you see? What did that concentration look like? Was there greater frustration in some children than others? Right? So pause and write, and when you finished writing all of that, come on back. Okay, now we're back. Deep breath. Okay, so let's talk about sensory seeking and sensory sensitive. What is that? Sometimes you will see children who are seeking sensory input, and then another child will be really avoiding that sensory input. So they're more sensory sensitive in that particular area. Now, what is really fascinating, y'all, is that every human has areas where they are more seeking sensory input and other senses where they're a little more sensitive. So it might be interesting to, pause and just take an inventory of where do you seek that sensory input, right? Do you like lots of visual input in your home or in your classroom? Do you enjoy that? Does that feel really satisfying or not? Do you want to take that off and just have clean lines, right? What about sound, right? Do you find that you like to have sound? It feels good to have sound happening all the time? Or is silence or more quiet environment more satisfying for you? What about your sense of taste, right? Do you enjoy what kind of taste sensations do you prefer, right? My husband and one of my daughters love all the spicy stuff. My other daughter and myself, not so much, right? So we have to, sometimes we can't share when we go out to eat because Craig will order something that's way too spicy. Okay. So think about all of those senses. Where are you more sensitive? Where are you more seeking more sensory input? Well, let's take a look at what you see that would indicate more sensory seeking behavior. Okay. So your children or you might stand a little too close or stand really close when you're talking with others. Right. Think about, I'm thinking of a cousin of mine who stood really, really close where, learning about those social cues were something that was really difficult for her. And she was still learning that her entire life. So think about, do you have children who stand really close, right? I'm sure all of us have had that child who come and they're telling us something that's really important. And maybe it's a surprise that somebody is coming to their house this weekend and they come and they're about this far from our face. And we've all felt that, right? It's like, oh, I felt that spit land right on my face. Great. But they're still learning, right? So that could be a sensory seeking thing, or it could be that they're still learning what is too close, what is too far away, what is the just right distance. Okay. All right. Carrying on. Another thing that you might see, another behavior that you might see that would indicate some sensory seeking behavior is an unusual tolerance for pain. Like you might see a child run, 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 and they fall down, and you feel that in your body, like, oh my gosh, that must have hurt. Or they come and show you this gigantic splinter in their finger, and they don't seem to be bothered by that. Or they pick themselves up and they've scraped their knee and there's blood there, but they're, seem like, meh, it's okay. They have an unusual tolerance for pain. You might also see children who walk with really loud, heavy steps, or who might stomp, 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 or who really kick through leaves, right? Those are sensory seeking behaviors. Doesn't mean it's problematic, but that's a sensory seeking behavior. Okay, next, these children might enjoy jumping, 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 or bumping or crashing into things or people, and sometimes not safely, right? So I'm thinking when children are in line, and I can imagine I'm remembering children who they've got their coat and they've got their boots and they've got their hat and they've got their gloves and they belly bump the person in front of them, and then kind of a domino things happen. Does that ever happen in your classroom? Please say yes. Yeah. So when that happens, that's a sensory seeking or maybe a connection seeking behavior. But on a physical level, that bumping or that crashing or pushing into another is seeking that sensory input, right? Okay. Another few behaviors are here. So they may not know their own strength. So they might, when they're writing or when they're drawing or when they're painting, it might rip the paper, right? They might be working with a material or a toy and it breaks, right? And then they might hurt another person by accident, right? They don't mean to, but that child, ouch, please don't squeeze my face like that. Right. So that could be sensory seeking behavior, is to that kind of grasp or that kind of writing or painting with a heavy pressure, right? Children may prefer rough play, might find great satisfaction when they're playing, puppy pile on the playground or in the classroom, right? That rough play feels very satisfying for them. You'll also notice some children who will not want to be a part of that, right? I think some of us who are of a certain age might remember something called a mosh pit. Have I just aged myself? Yeah. And that bumping and crashing into other humans felt really good and really satisfying. And then there were some people who were on the outside of the mosh pit and were not interested to be in it. Which one were you? I'm curious. Okay, so other things you might see in the classroom where they might touch people and objects often, right? So it might be that they're sitting beside us and we're reading a book and we notice like what is happening and the child is beside us rubbing the texture of our pants, or we might feel them start to touch and pull our hair or just to stroke it like this. So that's a sensory seeking behavior, right? They're seeking that feel of your hair or the denim on your pants, or maybe they like to squeeze the your arm, right? Yeah. Is that just me? Yeah. Okay. So they're touching people and objects often. Now, how much? Now, all of us as adults have done some of these as well, right? So think about when you go to a store, are you a person who, as you go down the aisles or you're looking around at things, do you touch all the fabrics of all the clothes that are hanging there? Well, one, we're learning about our environment. We're trying to feel for silk or cashmere, right? But that's a sensory seeking behavior. We're learning about our environment through our hands, through that sense, right? So we're touching objects and maybe people often. Another behavior you might see is seeking out and making loud noises, right? So young children are still developing that skill of modulating their volume, right? There's a physiological thing that's happening here. Their body is growing in their vocal systems, right? So they are making loud sounds, could be because this is still developing, right? They're still figuring out how to modulate their volume, right? Or they may be seeking out that really loud sound, right? They seem to really be satisfied to bang the drum really, really loud, or shake the shakers really, really loudly, right? Or the cymbals really loudly, right? You might see children who might chew on their shirt sleeves or their collars or other non-food items, right? So this is a sensory seeking behavior. So there are some accommodations that we can make for all of these, and we're going to get to those really soon. So they can get that satisfaction in a way that doesn't puppy pile on somebody who doesn't want a puppy pile, or touch something and not a person who doesn't want to be touched, or modulate the sound, or chew on something that's not their shirt sleeve or their collar or other non-food items, right? So here's a place to pause and write. So when you've seen these behaviors happen in your classroom, what kind of accommodations did you make where they could get that satisfaction and get that need met, and their friends not hurt, or their shirts not wet, or you don't have to take materials off the shelf to go and clean because they've had them in their mouth, or 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 so pause, right? What kinds of accommodations have you made to help the child get that need met, to um, to feel that satisfaction, right? And then be able to carry on peacefully and respectfully in the classroom. So now's the time to pause, write what you've done, write some new ideas that maybe have come, and then come on back when you're ready. Okay, we're back. Deep breath. Okay, now it's time to talk about sensory sensitive. Okay, so this is a little bit different. So this is where you see behaviors on the part of children where they are avoiding, they're stepping away, they don't want that sensory input, right? It could be that they're already on overload, sensory overload, Sensi-OV for short, right? So what you might see is children who may not like being hugged. And what does that mean, does not like? How do you notice? What would indicate that they don't want to be hugged? Right? So it might be like a stiffening of their body, or stepping away, or a no thank you, right? How are you teaching children that? And that's another topic of conversation, is about consent. But when we're talking about sensory sensitivity, perhaps they choose something else besides a hug, right? You might see that they become startled or maybe seem frightened when there's an unexpected sound or a bright light, right? And maybe it's time to do a fire drill and the fire alarm goes, and some children are much more impacted by this. Some children may not cover their ears, and some really are upset and startled and even frightened by that really unexpected loud sound, right? Maybe they know it's coming still and are still startled by the big sound or bright light. All right, they may hear the background noises that other people aren't able to detect, right? They might say, "Hey, Miss Amy, can you hear those birds outside? I hear the fire truck, or hear the trash truck coming." And we pause, like, what? I can't hear that at all. But they can hear all of those background noises that maybe we aren't able to detect, right? They may worry about being bumped in line or touched by another child while playing. And sometimes this could look like a child standing on the edge or not participating in a game that they've been invited to play to because they don't want that input, right? Children who are sensory sensitive might say that their clothes have a feel, like their socks feel weird, or the tag feels weird, or their clothes don't fit, right? Lots of different ways that they can tell us that feeling, that tactile sense, is on overload or is on heightened sensitivity, right? Their clothes have a feel, right? They may be avoidant or standoffish of swings or other P&V playground equipment, right? Like, nope, I'm not interested in that swing, or nope, I don't want to walk across that log, right? So you can notice or observe and notice, what is it that children choose, and also what is it that they don't choose on the playground or in your classroom. A child might have trouble knowing where their body is in relationship to other people or objects, right? And that's a can be an indicator of sensory seeking as well. But in this circumstance around sensory sensitivity, is they may stand farther away or not, or feel like, oh, Eddie is standing too close to me or is pushing me. And to us, it seems like there's plenty of room between you guys. What's up? Right. But they get a sense that it's too close. So that is their reality. So that is their truth. Right. And it could be, are they sensitive to when people are close or far away? Sensory sensitivity might show up in someone preferring quieter environments or avoiding the big group, right? Often a clue that a child is sensory sensitive is when you turn on music and they immediately cover their ears, or when there's a big laughter, somebody erupts into laughter, then a child might be startled, right? So those are some indicators. So let's pause again and write down, because you've seen probably some of these or maybe all of these in your classroom. So pause and write, how have you made accommodations, right? Some classrooms have noise canceling headphones, some have earplugs, some have gloves to wear, right? When you're scooping out that pumpkin, some children won't want that. Maybe you use a tool, right? So I'm telling you all the answers. So pause right now and write down, where have you made accommodations when children have shown you that it's too much? I'm sensitive to this. I want to avoid this. How have you made accommodations? And after you've written that down, come on back and we'll keep going. All right, deep breath. Okay. So now let's talk about something called sensory processing disorder. Now, probably rarely, not many people taking this webinar is someone who can make a formal diagnosis of SPD. So it could be when you begin to notice a lot of sensory sensitive or a lot of sensory sensory seeking behaviors that are not typically expected for a child that age and with that experience, right? And you start to go, something is different. Something is impacting their success and their happiness, their safety in the classroom. Let's get an evaluation just to make sure that this child has all the tools that they need to understand their sensory input, to integrate that and to modulate, to do all of that, right? So it could be that a child it might be helpful to have an evaluation to know if they would receive a formal diagnosis of sensory processing disorder. When you know that, sometimes a diagnosis can come with services, right? But you don't need a formal diagnosis to make accommodations, right? Important to remember that when any of us relate, work with, teach, love, care for a child, we are working with and loving and respecting the child that is in front of us, not their label, right? Let's just remember that. And sometimes it could be helpful so that this child might receive services that might assist them, right? We all know how important early intervention is, right? So if they can receive additional services and the accommodations that can come from an expert coaching us, or us trying some accommodations that assist the child in learning and growing, right? All of that can be really helpful for the child going forward. If I get that early intervention now, I'll learn those skills, I'll go through that struggle, and I won't need those accommodations my whole life. Sometimes you might have a child who will need accommodations their whole life. All right. So let's start as early as possible, easing their way, helping them feel satisfied, happy, content, safe, and healthy as much as possible, right? Okay, so there was me going on a little rabbit trail. Now I'm back, right? So if we're talking about specifically SPD, sensory processing disorder, I wanted to share some facts with you, right? So 90% of children who are on the autism spectrum have SPD. They experience some sort of sensory processing struggles, right? Either a sensory sensitive or sensory seeking, right? Most children with a developmental delay have some areas where they're seeking behaviors, seeking sensory input, and avoiding and are sensitive to sensory input, right? 60% of children with ADHD have some sort of sensory processing struggle, sensory processing disorder, right? So I'm still trying to balance how much input do I need, how much how much I want to avoid sensory input, right? So children who are on the spectrum or have a developmental delay or have a formal diagnosis of ADHD might struggle with greater impact than other typically developing children. ADHD is one of the most overused labels that there is, and that's just me saying that, right? I hear so often people either saying that about themselves or people saying that about other people or the children in their classroom. And sometimes I wonder, like, I'm wondering if ADHD is becoming something that we use so often that we forget that there are particular behaviors that would indicate a straight up formal diagnosis of ADHD, right? So consider that in the next several weeks. How often do you hear it? How often do you say it, right? Okay, so going forward, most likely children who have accurately received this diagnosis often have primary difficulty with processing sensory information. So that's something to notice as well in the children in your classroom. So some tips and thoughts and questions around SPD and around children who have excessive sensory seeking behaviors, or what we might see as excessive sensory sensitive behaviors, right? Or sensory avoidant behaviors. Some things to remember. One, let's just, as much as possible, let's eliminate scolding, right? Giving that respect to the child, to know that they're doing the best that they can. They're still learning as fast as they can to make those neural connections between their brain and their body and how they're understanding the world. So when we scold and say, you know, I can't believe you're doing that, or saying all of the things that we know we don't want to say, especially children who are figuring out their sensory balance, that we eliminate scolding as much as possible. Often, when we can understand their struggle and how that must feel in them and in their body and in their mind, when we can understand their struggle, we can know that scolding is not helpful and often not kind, and often, maybe not true, right? Okay, next. Let us remember that children do well if they can. There's a little Ross Green for you there. And what is it that he says? Children have difficulty when our expectations outstrip their skills, or something like that. But you know what I'm talking about? Check our expectations. Let us remember that children do well if they can, if they have those skills. If their skills are lagging and we can teach into those skills, this struggle won't be as great, right? And they'll do well. So remember, children do well if they can. Next, what can you say and what can you do? What kind of phrases are you using? How are you talking to children about what's happening? How are you talking in front of other children about what's happening? What about to your families, right? What also can you do? What can you do to notice what is this lagging skill? Is there an unmet need? And how can I teach into that or help the child get that need met? Okay. So that was the end of section 1. So we're about halfway through. So what I'd like for you to do is to take a break, pause this or turn it off, come back to it in a couple of days or so. Do some observation. Notice some things in your classroom. Notice some things in yourself. Take a look at, what are my sensory sensitive places, right? What are my sensory seeking behaviors? What about my colleague? What's their sensory preferences? So take some time to let that information percolate. Notice what you notice, observe what you observe, and then come on back and we'll go into part 2. All right. Let's see. So now I'm going to stop this recording. So this will be part 1, and then the next recording will be part 2. Until next time.